After my brother's funeral, emotions ran high. My sister-in-law, overwhelmed with grief and anger, struck me with a vase, her voice trembling with rage as she kicked me out of the house. But in that moment of chaos, I realized that beneath her pain lay a web of unresolved issues. This was just the beginning of a journey that would force us to confront our shared grief and misunderstandings. Hannah. You're nothing to me anymore. This is my house, Evelyn declared coldly, standing over me while I lay collapsed. Blood was dripping from the gash on my head. At the point where she shattered the crystal vase, everything started so innocently when David and I married 5 years ago. We were deeply in love, and I was overjoyed to begin our lives together. However, Evelyn had set out on a twisted mission to cause conflict between us from the start. She's just jealous because you're so young and attractive. David would dismiss her continued criticisms and hurtful remarks. Those should have served as warning signs of impending turmoil. Initially, there were minor complaints about my cooking or how I managed the household. She soon began to imply more openly that I was unworthy of David or his wealth. As I tried to keep the peace, her remarks became harsher. You are nothing but a gold digger, after the free ride. When David was not present, she hissed during her outbursts. My brother is too nice for you, despite mounting evidence of her manipulation. David remained blind to Evelyn's true nature, viewing her as his flawless older sister, who he could not fault. Whether it was guilt over being the favored child or simply brainwashing. He consistently sided with her. The situation worsened when I discovered bank statements revealing Evelyn had been gradually draining money from their inheritance since their parents died. I confronted David with evidence of her deceit, but he exploded, accusing me of interfering in family affairs. How can you accuse my sister of such a thing? He bellowed, his face turning bright red. You're the one with a problem, always looking for reasons to despise her. Evelyn then took advantage of the opportunity to play the victim while portraying me as the villain. The vase struck the side of my head unexpectedly, and as I fell to the ground, her figure towered over me, uttering menacing final words. Lying there, dazed and struggling to stay awake while Evelyn gloated about her impending victory, I realized the gravity of my situation. David, the love of my life, simply stood by like a coward, unable to confront his manipulative sister. Then I did it. My marriage was unsalvageable, but I was determined not to let that sociopath take everything away without a fight. I should have noticed the warning signs earlier, but I was too blinded by love and Evelyn's manipulative abilities. Oh, Hannah, this pot roast is slightly dry, don't you think? During her weekly dinner visits, Evelyn would offer a saccharine smile. Sadly, undermining me, you really should keep an eye on things in the kitchen. David would simply laugh it off and reassure me. Evelyn is just teasing. Everything's fine, honey. However, it was a recurring pattern. She critiqued my domestic skills and appearance, gradually eroding my confidence as David's wife. She spent money on anything to make me feel inadequate, and David absorbed his sister's toxic words. They gradually changed his loving gaze to one of doubt and disdain. Don quote, "Do you think the dress is a little revealing?" When we went outside, he started making comments. My sister is right. You could be a bit more modest. The emotional torment grew worse over time. Evelyn would arrive like a whirlwind, causing chaos and distress in her wake with each visit. David increasingly sided with her, chastising me for being overly sensitive when I pointed out her cruelty. She quote, "S my sister, Hannah Blood." He'd feel his 6'3" frame towering over him. You should learn to accept her. Meanwhile, Evelyn took on the role of the victim, batting her eyes innocently whenever I confronted her. I'm only trying to help. That is all. You're always overly defensive for no reason. I felt cornered, as if the walls were closing in and there was no way out. My once adoring husband had become Evelyn's accomplice, allowing her to treat me like dirt in my own home. I knew I had to find evidence of her true sinister nature before it was too late. That evidence surfaced when I discovered bank statements indicating Evelyn had been secretly draining funds from the inheritance she shared with David. After their parents passed away, I could not believe my eyes. This was more than her usual mental games. She was outright stealing from her brother. Look at this, I implored David desperately, showing him the statements. Your precious sister has been robbing you. His face turned beet red with rage, but not for the betrayal I had exposed. "How dare you look through my private financial records? What gives you the right?" He exploded. "Are you serious?" I cried out, feeling as if I'd been punched in the stomach. "She has been taking your money for years, and you are attacking me." Evelyn made her most cunning move, rushing into the room with tears streaming down her cheeks. She sobbed, "David, I had no choice," and pulled him into an embrace. Medical bills for Mom's cancer treatments, as well as nursing home fees for Dad. "I've been drowning in debt from caring for them. I did not want to worry you." Hook, line, sinker, just like that. The despicable leech had flipped the narrative, portraying herself as the martyr, making sacrifices for the family. David moved away from me, disgust on his face. "See what you've accomplished, Hannah. How could you put my sister through this?" After everything she had done for us, I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Evelyn simply smirked at me, having achieved yet another twisted victory. In that moment, I realized I was truly alone in this nightmare, which fueled my reckless determination to bring down my tormentor, whatever it took. Following Evelyn's latest manipulative stunt, the house was filled with tension like fog. David could barely look me in the eyes, still enraged by my betrayal in inquiring into his finances and exposing his precious sister's lies. "Hannah, how could you have done this to me?" He seethed across the dinner table, pushing his plate away and accusing Evelyn of stealing from her own family. "She gave up everything for us." I opened my mouth in protest, but he raised his hand to silence me. "Don't. I do not want to hear another word against her. My sister is the only person I can truly trust." The message was clear. I was now the enemy. For daring to challenge Evelyn's false narrative about being in debt due to caring for their parents, David had completely bought into her storyline. I should have realized at that point that there was no way to save our marriage, but a small, delusional part of me still held out hope. I decided to make one final attempt to reach David and expose his sister's evil. A few nights later, Evelyn arrived for another family dinner, dressed provocatively in a gaudy, low-cut top that appeared to be intended to provoke me. David, and I could only say a few words before she began her usual tirade. "Well, if it wasn't the little wife trying so hard to keep up appearances," she sneered as I set the table. "That shirt seems a little tight, doesn't it, dear?" Trying to catch someone's attention. "Besides, my brothers." I felt my cheeks flush with humiliation, but this time I refused to fall for her bait. "Hello, Evelyn. It's great to see you too," I responded calmly. She arched a carefully plucked brow at my calm demeanor. "What? No snide remarks today? Don't tell me you finally learned something in class. That is enough. Evelyn." David finally barked, demonstrating some backbone. "Leave her alone." I experienced a wave of gratitude. He was actually defending me. But Evelyn simply scoffed and shook her head slowly. "David, you are too blind to see. What a disgrace. A cunning, ungrateful shrew. She is constantly mouthing off. It's no surprise you have trouble controlling her. If I were you, I would have put that little troublemaker in her place a long time ago." That's when chaos broke out. "You are self-righteous," I exploded, causing a glass of wine to crash to the floor. "I should have known you'd continue your vicious, toxic behavior." Evelyn recoiled in feigned shock. "Why never?" "David, did you hear what she just called me?" David's expression was thunderous. "Hannah, watch your mouth. That is my sister you are talking to." I rounded on him. Years of resentment and anger have boiled over. "Are you kidding me now? She's the one who started throwing insults as soon as she walked in. Why do you make excuses for her? Because she is part of my family." He roared, spittle flying out of his mouth. "Blood is thicker than water, in case you forgot." "Oh yes, let us talk about family," I shot back, recalling how Red had been stealing money from your inheritance for years. "Or did you conveniently forget the bank statements I showed you?" Evelyn gasped and placed a delicate hand on her chest. "David, you didn't tell me she was still repeating that ridiculous accusation. How dare you continue to tell lies about me?" David exclaimed, looking like he'd been slapped. As he approached me, the vein in his neck bulged, fists clenched, and for a terrifying moment I thought he was going to strike me. "Get out," he said in a low, trembling voice. "Get out of my house now, before I do anything I'll regret." I looked at him in disbelief as Evelyn smirked behind him. This was it. My marriage had ended and she had triumphed, but I didn't leave quite yet. "You want me out so bad?" I shouted, feeling reckless. "Fine, I am gone, but not before everyone realizes your sister is a psychopathic, money-hungry snake." I stormed out of the house that night. My eyes burned with rage and despair. David had made his decision clear. His toxic sister always came first, no matter how much distress she caused me. Where would I even go? I had given up my career, my friendships, and my entire life to be David's wife. And now I was out on the street with nothing. All because I dared to defy his insanely devoted Evelyn. I had only one person to turn to, my best friend, Laura. When she opened her door, I burst into tears, releasing the flood of emotions I'd suppressed for years about how the evil woman had ruined everything. I screamed as Laura led me inside. David is so brainwashed that he will never recognize her for the manipulative monster she truly is. Laura wrapped me in a tight hug and let me cry it out. When I regained my composure, she met my gaze with grim determination. "Hannah, it's enough. You cannot let Evelyn walk all over you like this. It is time to fight back." I shook my head despondently at her. "You don't know half of what I've gone through. She has David wrapped around her finger, and he will never believe anything I say about her true nature." "Then we need evidence," Laura stated firmly. "Proof that she is the manipulative psychopath you claim she is. Once we have that, we can bring her down permanently." A spark of hope ignited in my chest. The bank statements proving she stole from their inheritance were only the tip of the iceberg. There had to be more we could do to expose her. Laura nodded grimly. "We start digging tomorrow morning. I will not let this witch destroy my best friend's life over the next few days." Laura and I devised a plan to infiltrate David's home and collect any information that could bring Evelyn down for good. She works as a realtor. Laura could easily make a copy of the house keys and scope out, while David was at work. "Keep an eye out for anything suspicious," she said as we slipped into the house. Emails, letters, and documents. It all could be the key to revealing her. I rifled through David's office with trembling hands and a racing heart. If Evelyn learned what we were doing, the thought of the consequences made me shudder. But then a hidden file piqued my interest. It contained bank statements and legal documents from several years ago. As I turned the pages, I felt blood drain from my face. "Laura, you should see this." I spoke, my voice trembling. The documents confirmed my worst fears. Evelyn had been investigated for allegedly attempting to murder her own husband years before. Witnesses claimed she had been draining his accounts and pressuring him to change his will. Then he mysteriously died in a suspicious car accident, leaving the police unable to determine foul play. Evelyn had inherited everything, and the case had gone cold. "Oh my God." Laura gasped and covered her mouth. "Are you saying this lunatic murdered her husband for money?" I nodded slowly and felt numb. "And she's been attempting to do the same with David. This is why she is so determined to turn him against me. I'm the only thing standing between her and my husband's inheritance." Laura's expression became steely. "We have everything we need now. It's time to hold her accountable for her crimes once and for all." A dark resolve washed over me, dispelling my fears and doubts. Evelyn's reign of terror was about to crumble around her. This time there would be no playing the victim. The evidence of Evelyn's murderous past silenced me. This was beyond her usual schemes and manipulations. She was a true psychopath who had most likely murdered for money before. "We must report this to the police immediately," Laura declared, her face paler. Who knows what that maniac is capable of, given that she has already gotten away with murder? I nodded, still shocked by the discovery. Part of me had always suspected Evelyn was insane, but having proof that she was actually a murderer took the situation to a terrifying new level. "You do not understand," I replied, feeling hollow. "David will not believe any of this. Whatever we show him, he's too deeply engrossed in her spell." Laura's jaw was set firmly. "Then we make sure she's brought to justice, with or without his assistance. This has gone far enough. It is time for her to face the serious consequences." Over the next few days, we went through the files, building an irrefutable case to present to the authorities. Bank statements, witness accounts, and even phone records revealed that Evelyn's husband had attempted to flee her grip in the months preceding his tragic accident. Everything was falling into place, exposing the truth. The photographs of the crime scene were the most chilling detail: a wrecked car in the ditch. The body was removed and placed in a black bag beside the road. I had to look away, sickened by the thought that Evelyn could have orchestrated such a heinous death solely to claim her husband's fortune. You know, she intends to do the same to David. Once I am out of the picture, I whispered to Laura, my voice shaking. First it was his inheritance from their parents, and now she demands everything. I built my entire lifestyle with him, including the house and cars. She will stop at nothing. Laura looked at me with determination. No, not if we first stop her. We have everything we need to lock this monster away for the rest of her life, where she cannot harm anyone else. The following day, we took the file to the police station and asked to meet with a detective. I could barely speak as I handed over evidence of Evelyn's escalating campaign of abuse and violence against me. The grizzled cop looked through the documents, his eyes widening. You're telling me this woman got away with murdering her husband for money years ago, and now she's attempting to do the same to her own brother? He inquired, his tone skeptical. I nodded miserably. David is completely under her control. She's completely brainwashed him into supporting her over me. I quote, "Ma'am, afraid of what she'll do if you don't put an end to her reign of terror." The detective's jaw tightened grimly. Do not worry, ma'am. We have more than enough here to lock this Evelyn up and throw away the key, attempting to murder her own flesh and blood for inheritance money. That is a new low, even in my line of work. He paused, as if studying me closely. I have to ask, how did you get all of this evidence on her? You've put together an impressive case file. I felt a rush of adrenaline as the weight of everything crashed down. This was it. The beginning of the end for Evelyn's twisted rule. No more games, manipulation, or faking tears. Only cold, hard consequences for her unforgivable actions. Let's just say I've had plenty of practice seeing through that snake's lies. I responded tightly. It's about time she paid for what she did to my family as they led me out. I swear I saw the cop give me the faintest of nods, a respectful expression on his weathered face. In that moment, I realized I'd been dismissed as a mere victim for far too long. The merciless former predator was about to become the prey, and this time I would show no mercy. I should have expected Evelyn to fight until the end. The demon herself was waiting the day after Laura and I handed over our damning evidence to the police. I returned to my friend's apartment. Well, if it's not the ungrateful little schemer. She sneered as I stood frozen in the doorway. Evelyn rose from the couch, hands on her hips, her eyes gleaming with malice. I knew you were planning something behind my back. My heart was pounding, but I refused to show fear. Get out of here, Evelyn. It is over. The police are fully aware of what you did, instead of appearing scared. She threw back her head, laughing, a cold, cruel sound that chilled my blood. You stupid girl, she hissed. Did you really believe that a few measly documents would be enough to bring me down in that horrible moment before I could blink? Evelyn lunged. She snatched a heavy crystal vase off the end table and raised it like a weapon. This is what you get for meddling! She screamed, and with sickening force the vase crashed down on my head. Pain erupted, blinding and brutal, and darkness engulfed me whole. I collapsed onto the floor, a lifeless heap of warm blood oozing from the wound. Evelyn stood over me, her face contorted with rage. You've died. Do you hear me? She snarled, and spittle flew. This is now my home, my life. I will make David see you. For what? You're a liar and a spiteful shrew. I tried to speak to fight back, but unconsciousness overtook me. The last thing I saw was David bursting through the doorway. His face was a mask of horror. Evelyn, what did you do? He cried, then oblivion. I drifted in and out of consciousness. Snippets of voices and movement reached me through a fog. At one point I heard sirens wailing in the distance. Finally, I woke up in a hospital bed. Laura sat beside me, her face filled with concern. My head throbbed with white-hot agony, and thick bandages encased my skull. Oh, Hannah, thank goodness you are awake. Laura squeezed my hand as she whispered, I thought I had lost you. Memories flowed back. Evelyn's twisted grin, the broken vase, the agonizing pain, the blood. She attempted to kill me. I rest my voice as a horse croaks. Where is she? Do they arrest her? Laura looked away. Her expression was troubled. The cops took her in. But Hannah, you will not believe it. David declined to press charges. He claims there was a misunderstanding, that you two were arguing about him. Fury surged through me, temporarily masking the pain and ignoring the throbbing in my head. I ripped the IV out of my arm and attempted to rise. What a spineless coward. I growled in response to what she did. He still defends her. Laura gently pressed her hand on my shoulder. Hannah, you should rest. Calm down. I wanted to scream, let out my rage, but a cold reality washed over me. My husband was so blinded by Evelyn's lies that he allowed her to attack me and then defend her actions. Our marriage was completely shattered. You are correct, I conceded, sinking back against the pillows. It is over. David is too far gone. He "Lol, never see her as the monster. She really is." But even as I spoke those words, a strange sense of calm washed over me. In that moment, I realized my fight was no longer with David. It was with Evelyn, the venomous snake, who was consumed by a never-ending desire for justice. I knew I would not rest until Evelyn faced the consequences of her actions. The games were over. Tears and pleading with David to see sense would not work. It was time to strike a decisive blow before his deranged sister caused more havoc on innocent lives. Turning to Laura, my eyes hardened with determination. We need to leave. I have a plan to make sure Evelyn never hurts another person. Are you in? Laura nodded decisively. Absolutely. Let's finally hold that psycho accountable for her crimes. As David entered the hospital room, an eerie silence fell over him, masking his face with uncertainty. My body tensed, and I instinctively grasped Laura's hand for support. What brought you here? I inquired bluntly, unable to conceal the bitterness in my voice. More excuses for your deranged sister. Though she flinches slightly at my tone, David did not take the bait. Instead, he slumped heavily into a chair, a tired expression on his face. Hannah, I'm not sure where to begin, he confessed quietly. What Evelyn did, attempting to kill you in cold blood. His voice trailed off, and his head shook slightly despite the gravity of his words. I felt no sense of vindication, only tired resignation and simmering anger. Save it, I said coldly. Your sister is a psychopathic murderer, and you knew this all along. You simply chose to disregard the ugly truth, because she was bloody. Years of accumulated resentment erupted before David could protest. Don't even try to deny this. I showed you proof that she stole your inheritance and manipulated you against me, even the files. For monetary gain, she is being exposed as her own husband's killer. But you couldn't be bothered facing the truth. A soft admission nearly inaudible. You are correct, David. Shoulders slumped in defeat. Absolutely correct. Hannah, I've been in such denial about Evelyn that she has taken control of my life. I allowed her to abuse you, manipulate me, and turn me against my own wife. He looked up. His eyes were filled with regret, which will haunt me forever. You never deserved any of it. Hell, I was simply too blind and weak to oppose her. Twisted games. White-hot rage flared in my chest, and I struggled to keep my cool. So what happens now? I asked, my voice trembling. Am I supposed to forgive and forget? Let you off the hook because you finally saw your sister for the monster she is. David shook his head slowly. No forgiveness or second chance. I do not deserve either, not after what I allowed to happen in my own home. The announcement hung heavily in the air. It was over between us. The blow, though expected, was delivered with the force of a physical attack. Despite my acceptance of our marriage's broken state, a delusional sliver of hope clung to me. A fantasy in which David seeks restitution after Evelyn's wickedness is exposed. I'm filing for divorce right away, he said, his gaze fixed elsewhere. And I will not contest anything. The house and the assets, it is all yours. Evelyn's poisonous touch ruined the best thing I'd ever had, and this is the least I can offer. Words failed me. A part of me wanted to let loose a torrent of rage, to level accusations against the shell of the man I loved. But a deeper emptiness persisted. His surrender failed to provide the catharsis I sought. Laura's contemptuous voice broke the silence. So that's it. You simply slink away, leaving your psychotic sister to rot in jail. Typical. I wish there was more I could say or do, David muttered. His shoulders slumped, but we both understand there is no turning back from what I allowed to happen. Hannah, you deserve so much better. With that, he rose and shuffled to the door. He paused at the threshold and cast one last glance back. For what it's worth, I apologize. I sincerely apologize for everything. Then he was gone, leaving me in the ruins of our lives. Tears streamed down my cheeks as Laura engulfed me in a hug, bursting the dam and releasing the tidal wave of anger, pain, and heartbreak I'd been holding in for so long. My marriage was over. My husband succumbed to Evelyn's toxic influence. Despite the mourning, a strange sense of freedom and resolve emerged. David might have been too weak to confront his twisted sister, but I would not be. Evelyn's reign of terror would come to an end eventually. In the days that followed David's departure, I was at a crossroads. One path resulted in despair. A journey through the ashes of my failed marriage. Consumed by the trauma and betrayal, the other blazed with a cold determination to make things right. Soon, I declared, my voice firm with conviction. We cannot let Evelyn get away with this. She attempted to kill me. Her own sister-in-law. That level of depravity cannot go unanswered. Laura returned my gaze with a grim nod. You're correct. That psycho has been avoiding consequences for far too long. It's about time the law caught up with her once and for all. With renewed determination, we set out on a mission to gather all available evidence to ensure justice was served. Our case against Evelyn was unquestionable. We had financial documents, witness statements, and a meticulous paper trail detailing her decades-long web of greed, manipulation, and possible murder. This should be enough to bury the viper for good. Laura looked at the hefty file with grim satisfaction. She muttered, "No more crocodile tears to get me out of this one." My heart was pounding with an adrenaline rush. This was it. The first steps to ensure Evelyn never hurts another innocent person, as she nearly did to me. I was finally reclaiming my power, freeing it from her toxic grip. We marched straight to the downtown police precinct and requested a detective, a seasoned officer dressed in a rumpled suit. Eventually led us into an interview room. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the damning evidence. Are you telling me this? Evelyn has been deceiving and manipulating her own family for years? He inquired slowly, possibly murdering her first husband. I returned his gaze with unwavering resolve. That is correct. Detective. And what about her most recent act? Trying to murder me. Her own sister-in-law bashed my skull in. She is a merciless psychopath who will stop at nothing. The cop's jaw clenched as he examined the crime scene photographs. The undeniable evidence of Evelyn's brutal assault. I've seen a lot of scum in my days, he admitted. But this is an entirely new level of depravity. He slammed the file shut and gave me an intense stare. Miss Larson, please know that we are taking this case very seriously, especially given the amount of evidence you've provided. We confident we can imprison this woman for a long time. A weight was lifted from my shoulders, followed by a wave of lightheaded relief. After years of gaslighting and torture, my voice was finally heard. My claims regarding Evelyn. This cruelty is believed. Thank you, Detective. I spoke, my voice trembling slightly. You have no idea what it means to know that the law will not let her crimes go unpunished this time. The cop gave a curt smile. No need to thank you, ma'am. We're just doing our jobs, removing a dangerous predator from the streets. You are the one who demonstrated true courage in confronting Evelyn's abuse and refusing to back down. Laura and I leave the precinct. Despite the challenges that lay ahead, I was overcome with a sense of peace and resolution. Evelyn's reign of terror would finally be brought to justice. No matter how much she cried wolf in that moment, I realized my bitter struggle had forged a strength I had no idea I possessed. The once meek and tormented wife was no more. I was a survivor who rose from the ashes of Evelyn's twisted games, prepared to fight another day. And this time, I would win. While she faced the bitter consequences of her actions, which were well-deserved. As time passed after being released from the hospital, I felt the weight of years of emotional and physical abuse slowly lift. Evelyn had left my life. Laura and I had done everything we could to gather evidence, even though we weren't in jail yet, and it was now up to the legal system to take her down. But I wasn't going to wait any longer. I had a life to rebuild. David and I finalized our divorce quietly. He left the house almost immediately, unable to bear the constant reminder of the devastation his sister had caused in our marriage. Despite everything, I no longer felt angry toward him, only pity. He was a broken man, the victim of his sister's manipulation, but that didn't excuse his decisions. His commitment to Evelyn had cost him his marriage, home, and happiness. The house was now mine, a hollow victory that was unexpectedly bittersweet. I sold it within weeks because I didn't want to stay in a place where I had been humiliated and hurt. The proceeds from the sale enabled me to start over, far from the city where my previous life had crumbled. Meanwhile, Evelyn faced a reckoning. The police investigation, combined with the evidence Laura and I provided, was sufficient to build a strong case, including witness statements from her first husband's friends and financial records demonstrating embezzlement and attempted fraud. The authorities have reopened their investigation into her husband's mysterious death. The detective in charge of Evelyn's case called me on the day she was arrested. "It is over, Miss Larson," he said with a grim satisfaction in his tone. "We've got her. Evelyn will not harm anyone else." Relief washed over me, but I did not feel triumph. It marked the end of the process. After years of torment, I was finally free of Evelyn's web of deception and cruelty. Evelyn's trial was scheduled for the following year. She was charged with embezzlement, assault, and fraud, as well as a reopened investigation into her husband's suspicious death. Initially, she denied everything, but the mounting evidence was undeniable. Her facade of innocence was finally shattered in court when a former acquaintance of her late husband testified, providing Danny with evidence that Evelyn had pressured him to change his will. Shortly before his death, she was sentenced to 20 years in jail. This story received extensive media coverage, with some referring to her as a black widow who preyed on family members for financial gain. Evelyn may have believed she could manipulate her way out of any situation, but this time there was no escaping justice. I never saw David again after our divorce was finalized. He left the city, possibly to avoid the shame of what had occurred. I learned through mutual acquaintances that he had entered a rehabilitation program for emotional trauma. He lost everything. He had defended his wife, home, and sister at the expense of his own happiness. I no longer harbored hatred for him. I loved him once, and though his weakness had led to our demise, I hoped that someday he would find peace, just as I was starting to find mine. Laura and I moved forward with renewed vigor. We both decided to leave the city and start over in a small town, where I discovered a job that reignited my passion. Working as a consultant for victims of domestic abuse, I gained insight into the dangerous, often unseen emotional manipulation that people like Evelyn can inflict on others. It became my mission to assist those who felt powerless, as I once did, in regaining their sense of self-worth and control over their affairs. Ivory, build my life step by step. Surrounded by supportive people who lifted me up, I clung to the house, money, and other symbols of stability. They no longer mattered. I had something far more valuable: my freedom, peace, and the determination to never let anyone bring me down again. Evelyn had been a dark force in my life, but she was ultimately defeated, not only by the legal system, but also by my refusal to succumb to her cruelty. I had triumphed not through violence or vengeance, but through perseverance, patience, and a refusal to let her break me. And that, I realized, was the most satisfying victory of all.